The high desert air was cold before the sun, holding a stillness that felt like a lie. Tahan stood beside his unshod pony on the crest of the long mesa, his figure a line of patient muscle against the graying eastern sky. Below him, the world was shadows and stone. His world, or what was left of it. He was a man of perhaps 27 winters, old enough to remember the great herds that ran like thunder, young enough to know the sound of the iron horse splitting the prairie. His hair was long and black, bound by a simple leather thong. He wore buckskin leggings and a shirt that had seen much life, and he carried the history of his people on the set of his shoulders. A bow was strung across his back. A rifle rested in the crook of his arm. He was skilled with both. He had to be. He looked east, past the place where the two new steel rails cut a sharp, unnatural line across the land, a wound that would not heal. There, just moving into the basin, was the thing he had been watching for. A wagon train, a slow, crawling serpent of white canvas and groaning wheels, kicking up a plume of the red Texas dust that choked everything. It was escorted. Cavalry. He counted maybe 20 blue-coated soldiers, ants from this high up, but ants with repeating rifles and a belief that God had given them this ground. A tightness gripped Tahan's chest. This was the borderland, the edge of the New Mexico territory, land his people had hunted for generations. Now, it was a place of forts and settlements with names like Dust Creek, places that smelled of whiskey and fear. He was a warrior. He had fought. He had seen his brothers fall. But he had also seen the starvation in the winter camps, the sickness that came with the white man's blankets, the hopelessness in the eyes of the elders. Old Red Elk spoke of war, of dying with honor, of driving the invaders back into the sea. Tahan respected the old man's fire, but he saw the reality. They were outnumbered, outgunned. The buffalo were vanishing. Survival, he argued in council, now meant something different. It meant learning to walk a path between two worlds, a path that felt like balancing on a knife edge. He had spoken with the agents. He had even scouted for the army once, trying to build a bridge of trust, but the bridge always burned. This new column of settlers, pushing deeper than any before, felt like a betrayal of the last fragile promise. He felt a storm coming, a storm not just of sand, but of blood and steel. His deepest purpose was not just to fight, but to protect what remained, to keep the people from being erased. How? He did not know. Miles away, inside one of the lurching wagons, Abigail Collins pressed her face against the rough canvas flap, trying to breathe air that was not thick with the smell of axle grease and unwashed bodies. She was 18 years old, and everything she had ever known was 1,000 miles behind her. Her world had been her father's small, damp church in a town she could now barely picture. She was innocent of the world, but she was not stupid. She knew this was not an adventure. It was a transaction. Her father, a poor man with a voice full of heaven and pockets full of air, had sent her west, to a new life. Abigail, he had prayed, his hands trembling on her shoulders. A fine marriage, a wealthy man, a man of God and standing, Major Harlan Briggs. Abigail, called Abby by no one but herself in her own thoughts, had nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She clutched the small wooden trunk at her feet, which held her 2 good dresses, her mother's worn Bible, and another, newer Bible from her father. Tucked inside her bodice, scratching her skin, was the letter of introduction. She had not been allowed to read it. She knew, with a certainty that made her sick, that she was being sent to marry a man she had never met, a man whose wealth was meant to save her father's failing parish. Her own secret. Frail hope was not for riches, but for a small corner of the world where she could be safe and free, and not sold like livestock. She listened to the jingle of harnesses, the rough calls of the teamsters, the rhythmic clump of the cavalry horses. The soldiers were supposed to be their protectors, but she did not like the way they looked at the few women in the train. Their eyes were hard and hungry. They spoke often of Major Briggs, their commander back at the fort. They spoke of him with a mixture of fear and admiration. A man who brought civilization and law to this wild place. A man who knew how to handle the savages. One of the soldiers, a corporal with a tobacco-stained beard, spat a stream of brown juice into the dust. "The major, he wants this land cleared by winter," the man said, loud enough for the wagon drivers to hear. "He's got investors back east ready to build, says this whole valley will be prime grazing land once the Comanche are dealt with." "Dealt with?" asked a nervous-looking man driving the wagon ahead of Abby's. The corporal just grinned, a humorless stretching of his lips. "The major has his ways, legal and proper." Abby shivered, though the morning was already growing warm. She pulled her thin shawl tighter. This was the man she was being sent to marry. Riding near the head of the cavalry detachment was a man who did not belong to either group. He was white, but he sat his horse like a native, with a fluid, easy grace. His name was Jake Holloway. He wore a mix of clothing, army trousers and a buckskin shirt, with a cavalry hat shielding his eyes. He was the scout. Jake knew this land. He had lived among the Comanche for a time, spoke their language, and knew their paths. Now, he works for Major Briggs. He was the bridge Tahan sought to build, but Jake Holloway was a bridge built of shadows and deceit. He rode with an air of lazy confidence, but his eyes were never still, constantly scanning the ridges, the arroyos, the dust. He was Tahan's opposite, a man who knew both worlds and used that knowledge to betray them both for coin and the favor of men like Briggs. He knew Tahan was out here. He could almost smell him in the wind. He also knew Major Briggs's real plan, and it had nothing to do with peace treaties. The sun climbed higher, baking the red dust. The air was filled with grit. It got into Abby's mouth, her eyes, the folds of her dress. This was the West. It was not the green hills of her imagination. It was vast, empty, and terrifying. She saw no beauty in it, only threat. The sunset, when it came, would be a stunning, violent smear of orange and purple, but she would see it as a bleeding sky. She saw a small band of wild horses in the distance, running free, and felt a pang of jealousy so sharp it stole her breath. In the distance, unseen, Tahan's sister, Aiyana, hid in their small, hidden camp, worrying about her brother. In the town of Dust Creek, a Mexican cowboy named Luis watered his horse, watching the soldiers ride out, his face impassive, but his mind sharp. And in the elder's lodge, Red Elk sharpened his lance, chanting the old songs, refusing to listen to Tahan's talk of compromise. The wagon train lumbered on, a fragile line of civilization in a land that did not want it. The soldiers held their rifles a little tighter. They talked about the Comanche as red devils, creatures of nightmares. Abby listened, her heart hammering. Why did they have to be afraid, she wondered. A thought so heretical she almost spoke it aloud. If this was their land, why were they savages for protecting it? On the mesa, Tahan watched them come. He watched the greedy eyes of the escort, the way they pointed not at the horizon, but at the land itself, as if measuring it for fences. He had trusted a white man's paper once. He had seen it torn up when gold was found. Could he trust any of their promises? Ever again? The two columns, one of canvas wagons and one of a lone Comanche warrior, moved toward an inevitable collision under a sky that held its breath. The wagon master called the halt an hour before sundown, choosing a spot beside a creek bed that was more dust than water. The sky was turning a deep, bruised purple at its edges, and a wind had picked up, whispering through the sparse grama grass. It was a restless wind, carrying the chill of the high plains night. Abby climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff and aching. The other travelers began the rituals of camp-building fires, watering stock, mothers hushing fretful children. But the atmosphere was wrong. The cavalry escort, which had been so rigid and watchful for days, now seemed sloppy. The corporal she had noted earlier was passing a flat tin bottle to another soldier, and their laughter was too loud. Several others were gathered in a knot near the creek, their rifles leaning carelessly against a wagon wheel. A prickle of fear, sharp and cold, ran up Abby's spine. She approached the wagon master, a gaunt man named Peters. "Sir," she began, her voice small, "the soldiers, they seem unwell." Peters glanced at the drinking men and spat. "They're soldiers. Miss, they get thirsty. Major Briggs ain't here to keep 'em in line. They'll sleep it off. Do not worry about your head." He turned away, dismissing her. Abby retreated, her anxiety tightening her throat. The wind was moaning now, a low, mournful sound. The sun bled out, and the first stars pricked the violet darkness. It was then that the first shot cracked through the camp. It was followed by a chorus of high, ululating cries that seemed to come from the rocks themselves. A line of riders burst from the twilight, dark shapes against the fading sky. They wore feathers in their hair, and their faces were smeared with paint. They were on them before the first woman screamed. Chaos erupted. It was a wave of noise and terror. Men shouted, horses screamed, gunfire flashed yellow in the dusk. An arrow thudded into the canvas of Abby's wagon, right where she had been sitting moments before. "Comanche!" a man bellowed, his voice cracking with panic. "Comanche!" Abby dove under the wagon, her hands scraping on the rocky soil. She squeezed her eyes shut, her body rigid, pressing herself against the massive wooden wheel. She heard the thud of running feet, the crash of a crate being overturned. The smell of whiskey was suddenly replaced by the sharp, acrid scent of kerosene and smoke. Her wagon was on fire. She looked out from under the axle, her heart a cold stone in her chest, and she saw him. He was magnificent and terrifying, mounted on a paint pony that seemed to move like the wind itself. He wore no shirt, his skin dark, his muscles stark in the flickering light of the burning wagons. War paint slashed across his high cheekbones. His eyes were black and cold, reflecting the flames. It was a man from the mesa, Tahan. He was in the center of the chaos, a whirlwind of deadly grace. He fired his rifle from horseback, and one of the half-drunk soldiers fell, his hands clutching his chest. Tahan wheeled the pony, his long hair flying, and used a knife to slash the tethers of the wagon train's spare horses, sending them stampeding through the camp, adding to the bedlam. He was the leader. He was the devil her father had warned her about. Abby fumbled in her bodice, her fingers closing around the small wooden cross she wore on a string. She pressed it to her lips, her prayers a silent, frantic jumble of words. "Our Father, who art in heaven, delivers me, O God, deliver me!" She was going to die here, in the dirt, under a burning wagon, at the hands of a savage. The heat on her back was becoming unbearable. The canvas above her was now a sheet of roaring flame. She had to move, but her limbs were frozen. A painted face appeared at the front of the wagon. Not Tahan, but another man. He grinned, his teeth white in the firelight, and raised a hatchet. Abby screamed, a thin, useless sound. A shot exploded next to her ear. The man with the hatchet grunted, his eyes wide with surprise, and collapsed. A new shadow fell over her. She looked up, past buckskin-clad legs, into the face of the demon himself. Tahan. He was off his horse, leaning down, his face inches from hers. The firelight carved harsh planes on his face. He was not looking at her with malice, but with a fierce, burning intensity she could not understand. He reached for her. She flinched, shielding her head, her cross digging into her palm. "No, please." He ignored her plea. His hand, strong and rough, clamped around her arm. He did not pull her gently. He yanked her, dragging her from beneath the wagon just as the flaming canvas roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and embers. The heat seared her cheek. He threw her bodily onto the back of his pony, which stood rock-steady amid the gunfire and screams. He vaulted up behind her in one fluid motion, his arms circling her waist like a band of steel, crushing the air from her lungs. "If you want to live, he said, his voice low and urgent, his breath hot in her ear. Hold tight. Abby's mind simply stopped. The world tilted. The screams, the fire, the paint, the terror. All of it crashed against one impossible fact. He spoke English. He spoke perfect, unaccented English. Tahan kicked the pony's flanks, and the animal leaped forward, launching them from the circle of burning wagons into the darkness of the open plain. Abby clung to the horse's mane, her body pressed hard against the solid wall of Tahan's chest. She could feel the heat of his skin through her thin dress, the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her back. They rode hard, leaving the sounds of the massacre behind. The cries and gunshots faded, replaced by the rhythmic drumming of the pony's hooves and the rush of the night wind. Abby risked a glance backward. The camp was a shrinking pyre of orange against the black hills. Tahan pulled the pony for a walk, his body still tense, listening. He urged the horse into the shadow of a low mesa, following a dry wash that shielded them from view. After several minutes, he reined in, looking back not at the camp, but at a ridge to the south. Abby followed his gaze. She saw riders silhouetted against the sky, but they were not leaving. They were watching. One of them lit a cigar, the red coal glowing in the dark. As she watched, one of the riders dismounted and seemed to be checking something on the ground. "Who are they?" she whispered, her voice raw. Tahan was silent for a long moment. His eyes narrowed. When he spoke, his voice was tight with a cold fury she had not heard before. "The men who started the fire." "But they were Indians," Abby stammered, confused. "I saw them. The paint, the feathers." "White men," Tahan said, his voice flat. "Dressed as Comanche, dressed as my people, to start a war." He pointed with his chin toward the ridge. "And their leader, the scout, Jake Holloway." Abby's mind reeled. Jake Holloway, the Army's own scout. She had seen him that morning, talking to the corporal. Tahan had seen him too. As they rode clear, Tahan had watched Holloway, the man who had once been his brother, calmly aim his rifle and shoot one of the fake raiders in the back. Then he shot a settler who was trying to crawl to safety. He was cleaning up, erasing the evidence. This was not a raid. It was a fabrication, a monstrous, bloody lie. Tahan understood it all in that one cold instant. Briggs wanted this land. To get it, he needed a reason to break the treaty, a reason to bring in more soldiers, a reason to exterminate the people. He had created his reason. He had sacrificed the settlers he was paid to protect. Abby began to tremble, a deep, racking shudder that started in her belly and shook her whole frame. The soldiers had not been lax. They had been complicit. They had let this happen. The people she was taught to trust were the monsters, and the man she had been taught to fear, the savage whose painted face haunted her nightmares, had just saved her life. She turned, twisting in his grip to look up at him. The war paint was stark, but his eyes were no longer cold. They were filled with a deep, weary anger. "Who are you?" she asked, the question tearing from her throat. "Why did you save me?" Tahan looked down at her. The moonlight caught the faint sheen of tears and dust on her cheeks. He saw her terror, but he also saw the small, crushed Bible clutched in her hand, the letter peeking from her torn bodice. He knew exactly who she was and where she was going. "Because," he said, his voice rough, "you should not be sold like a horse." Her breath hitched. He knew. Somehow, he knew. The shock of his words, the intimacy of his knowledge, was almost as profound as the rescue itself. She had no reply. They rode on in silence, the moon climbing high, washing the sand and stone in ghostly white light. The closeness of his body, which had been a source of terror, now felt like the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved into madness. Yet the suspicion remained. He was still a stranger, a warrior. He had killed men tonight. She had seen it, after what felt like hours. Tahan guided the pony into a narrow, winding canyon. The walls rose high on either side, cutting off the moonlight and the wind. It was quiet, the air still. He dismounted, then reached up for her. His hands went to her waist, and he lifted her down as easily as if she were a child. Her legs buckled when they touched the ground, and she would have fallen if he had not steadied her. His hands lingered at her waist for just a second, a moment of human contact, before he stepped back, putting a careful distance between them. He led the pony to a small patch of grass near a trickle of water seeping from the rock. He let the horse drink, then spoke to it in his own language, his voice soft, the hard edges gone. Abby watched him, her mind numb, her body aching. There were two men, the killer from the camp, and the gentle stranger in the canyon. She did not know which one to fear more. He took a water skin from the pony's flank and handed it to her, his gaze unreadable. He did not move closer, did not threaten. He just watched her, his protector and his captor, leaving her to tremble in the cold, silent dark. The canyon was utterly silent. Abby's own harsh breathing seemed to echo off the stone. She took the water skin, her hands shaking so badly that she spilled the first drops onto the dust. She drank, the water tasting of leather and grit. But it was life. He had moved away, tending to the pony, his back a rigid line of muscle. He offered her no threat, but his very presence was a violation of her entire world. She sank to the ground, her legs refusing to hold her. The night air was cold, and she began to shiver, the terror of the past hours settling deep into her bones. Her hand went to her bodice, seeking the small comfort of her cross. Her fingers brushed against the torn fabric and the sharp edge of the letter. The letter, her introduction, her bill of sale. Her fingers fumbled, pulling the crumpled paper free. It was stained with sweat and dust, and torn at the corner where Tahan had grabbed her. The moon was high enough now that a sliver of its cold, white light reached the canyon floor. She angled the paper to catch the glow. It was her father's hand, the familiar, elegant script he used for his Sunday sermons. To Major Harlan Briggs, Commander, Fort Stanton. Sir, in accordance with our correspondence, I send to you my daughter, Abigail. She is 18 years of age, has been raised in the fear of the Lord, and is pure in body and spirit. She is obedient and has been instructed in her duties as a wife. I trust her qualities will be found satisfactory upon her successful arrival and their union. I will expect the patronage for my congregation as promised in your last letter. May God's grace be upon your endeavor. Reverend Michael Collins. Abby read the words once, then twice. They did not make sense. Satisfactory, patronage as promised. Union. This was not the letter of a loving father sending his daughter to a new life. This was the language of a merchant. The sickness that had churned in her stomach for weeks exploded into a wave of cold, clarifying nausea. Tahan's words came back to her, sharp and cruel. You should not be sold like a horse. He knew, he had known all along. She looked up from the paper, her eyes burning, not just with fear, but with a new, bitter shame. Her father, her own father, had traded her for money to fix his church, to secure his own position. She was the commodity. Tahan finished checking the pony's hooves and turned. He saw the letter in her hand, the white paper stark against the dark ground. He saw the recognition in her eyes. He is the man who ordered the attack tonight, Tahan said. His voice was quiet, without emotion, a simple statement of fact. Abby's head snapped up. What? She whispered. Major Harlan Briggs, the man you were sent to marry. He planned the massacre. No. The word was a reflex, a denial of a world spinning out of control. No, he is a soldier. He is the law. He was protecting us. A sound, almost a laugh, escaped Tahan's throat. It was a bitter, dry sound. He protects his own interests. His law is written in gold and paid for with blood. Our blood. And tonight, Your people's blood. He walked closer, squatting on his heels a few yards away. He was no longer the painted warrior from the fire. In the dim light, he just looked like a man, weary and filled with a deep, cold anger. 1 year ago, Tahan said, his voice low, Briggs called for a council of peace. He promised food for the winter. He promised medicine. Our lands were shrinking. The buffalo were gone. My uncle, Red Elk's brother, went to speak for us. He and 5 others. They carried the white flag. He paused, his gaze fixed on the dark canyon wall. Briggs's men were hidden in the rocks. They shot them down before they were 50 steps from the fort. Briggs reported it as a failed ambush by hostile warriors. He was given a commendation. He was promoted to major. Abby stared at him, horrified. How can you know this? I was there, Tahan said. I was watching from the ridges. Farther back, I saw it all. And I know Briggs. He wants this land. He wants it cleared. The investors for the railroad pay him for every mile of track that is safe. And the cattle barons pay him for every acre of grazing land he pacifies. Tonight, he needed a reason to break the treaties for good. He needed a Comanche massacre. But how did you know about me? Abby's voice was barely audible, the letter trembling in her hand. I have friends in the settlements, he said. A man named Luis, who hauls freight. He hears the soldiers talk when they drink. He heard Major Briggs boasting, bragging to his officers that he was securing his position, making himself respectable. He was importing a pure Eastern bride to make him look like a family man. Luis heard your father's name. I knew you were in this wagon train. I was not looking to attack. I was watching to find you, to find proof of what he is. I did not know he would move so fast. I did not know he would murder his own people to start his war. A cold dread, colder than the night air, settled over Abby. What will happen now? She asked. Will you take me back? We must tell someone. We must go to the fort and tell them what we saw. Tahan looked at her, his eyes searching her face, and his expression was almost pitiful. And who will they believe? Little Bird, you, the hysterical girl promised to their commander, or me, the Comanche warrior whose head they want on a spike? The moment you speak, Briggs will declare you mad. He will say, I bewitched you, that you are shamed. He will lock you away where you can speak to no one, and they will hang me before the sun sets. And your testimony will die with me. Abby's breath hitched. He was right. She was trapped. Then what can we do? Tahan stood up, a tall, dark silhouette against the stone. He faced a choice. He could leave her, let the desert take her, or let the soldiers find her. She would be silenced, and his people would be blamed for the massacre. The war would begin. He could take her to Briggs himself, trade her for his own safety, but Briggs would kill her to silence her, and the war would still begin. There is only one path, he said, his voice hard. To the world. I am now what Briggs wanted. I am the savage who attacked your wagon. I am the warrior who murdered your people, and I am the man who stole you. Abby recoiled, scrambling backward on the gravel. Are you kidnapping me? I am keeping you alive, he said, turning to her. And you are keeping my people alive. You are the only witness. You are the only proof that can stop Briggs. But to protect you, and to get you to someone who will listen, you must be my prisoner. He laid it out, his voice sharp and logical. As long as Briggs thought she was a captive, he would hunt Tahan. He would want her silenced. Yes, but he would not suspect she was a willing witness. His focus would be on the hunt, not on the truth. I will not take you to the fort, Tahan declared. I will take you to my people. You will tell the elders what you saw. You will prove that this war is a lie. And then, we will find a way to get your story to his commander, a man named Colonel Mason, at a different fort. They say he is an honest man. Your people, Abby whispered, the word tasting like ash. They will kill me. They will not kill a guest I bring, he said. But they will hate you. They will fear you. He looked down at her. his face a mask of stone. "And I do not know if you are strong enough to survive it." He did not trust her. He saw a soft white woman, a preacher's daughter, raised in fear and pale comfort. He wondered if she would collapse, or worse, betray him the instant she saw a blue uniform. And she, in turn, looked at him and saw the man from her nightmares. The painted face, the blood, the casual violence of the rescue. He was a heathen, a warrior. He was everything she had been taught to fear. But he was also the only man who had told her the truth, the only man who had not tried to sell her. Miles away, as the first gray light of dawn touched the ruined camp, Major Harlan Briggs arrived. He sat his tall black horse, his uniform immaculate, his blond beard neatly trimmed. He surveyed the carnage, his blue eyes cold. The bodies of the settlers were already stiffening. The burned wagons were smoking skeletons. Jake Holloway slouched in his saddle nearby, his face grimy with smoke. "It is a mess, Major," Jake said, spitting tobacco. "A complete botch." "It is a tragedy," Briggs corrected him, his voice smooth and clear for the surviving, shaken soldiers to hear. "A brutal, savage attack. But it was not a botch. Holloway, it is a pretext." He turned his gaze on the scout. "Where is she?" Jake pointed with his chin toward the north. "Gone. Tahan took her. I saw him plain as day. Rode right into the thick of it, snatched her off her wagon, and bolted. Tracks are clear. Just him and the girl." Briggs's expression tightened. This was a complication, but it was also an opportunity. He raised his voice, pitching it with anger and grief. "He did not just take her. Holloway, he abducted her, that Comanche animal. Tahan, the one who talks of peace, has slaughtered these good people. He has murdered women and children, and he has taken Miss Collins as his prize, to defile and abuse." A young lieutenant looked horrified. "Sir, what are your orders?" "Orders." Briggs' voice was steel. "You will ride to every settlement, every fort. You will wire the telegraph, a $500 bounty on Tahan's head. Dead, I do not want him brought in for trial. I want his scalp. Is that clear?" "And Miss Collins, sir?" the lieutenant asked, paling. Briggs' face crumpled into a mask of perfect, calculated sorrow. "My intended bride," he said, his voice breaking. "That animal has shamed her. She is compromised. If she cannot be saved—" He looked directly at Jake Holloway, his eyes hard and empty. "Ensure she is not left to suffer. Do you understand me?" "Scout." Jake Holloway understood. Briggs wanted no witnesses. He wanted Tahan dead, and he wanted Abby dead. A slow, wolfish grin spread across Jake's face. $500 was a fortune, and he had his own history with Tahan. "Dead or alive, Major, I know his paths. He cannot hide from me for long." "Good," Briggs said. "Take your best men. Lead the pursuit. Burn out any village that gives him shelter. This is war." That night, Tahan and Abby stood on a high ridge, miles from the canyon. They were both exhausted, moving slowly. Abby's dress was in tatters, and her feet were raw. Tahan had washed the paint from his face, and without it, he looked younger, his face carved with weariness. He stopped, holding up a hand. Abby listened. At first, she heard nothing but the wind. Then, she saw what he was looking at. Far below, in the dark basin they had just crossed, were tiny sparks of light, campfires, at least 24 of them. "They are fast," Tahan said, his voice flat. Abby's heart seized. "The soldiers." "Holloway," he replied. "He knows this land. He knows how I think. He knows I would come this way." She looked at him, her eyes wide with a new panic. "What do we do?" Tahan surveyed the land ahead. 2 paths split before them. One, to the east, was a wide, open game trail. Following the low ground, it was the fastest way to his people. "That is the path he expects," Tahan said. "He will set his trap there. or he will run us down on the open plain by morning." He turned west, toward a jagged black crack in the mountains. It looked less like a path and more like a wound in the earth, a wall of shadows. "And that," he said, "is the way we must go." Abby stared at the black chasm. It looked hostile, impassable. But what is in there, it looks. "It is called the Canyon of the Wind," Tahan said. "It is a treacherous place. The rocks shift. The wind can blind a man with sand. There are cougars. It is a hard path, but it is the only one Holloway will not dare to follow in the dark. He will wait for morning. By then, we must be through." He swung up onto his pony, the animal's muscles trembling with fatigue. He looked down at her, his face grim in the moonlight, and held out his hand. Abby looked at the distant fires of the soldiers, the men who were supposed to protect her, the men who were now hunting her. Then she looked at the dark, terrifying canyon, and the heathen warrior who was her only hope. She took his hand. It was rough and warm. He pulled her up behind him, his arm settling around her waist. "Hold tight," he said again. This time, it was not a command. It was a warning. He turned the pony's head toward the darkness and urged it forward, into the storm. The entrance to the Canyon of the Wind was a jagged black mouth, exhaling a cold, damp air that smelled of ancient stone and decay. Tahan dismounted and forced Abby to do the same. The path was too treacherous to ride. He took the pony's bridle, leading the exhausted animal into the darkness. Abby followed, her hand trailing on the pony's flank, using it for balance. The ground was uneven, littered with sharp rocks and loose shale that shifted under her ruined shoes. The canyon walls rose up on either side, so high and so close together that they blocked out the moonlight, leaving them in an almost total blackness. The only sound was the clink of the pony's hooves on stone, Abby's own ragged breathing, and a low, distant moan that seemed to come from the earth itself. It was the wind, moving through the high, narrow passages above them, a sound that raised the hair on her arms. They walked for what felt like hours. Tahan moved with a silent, certain tread, as if his feet could see the path. Abby stumbled constantly, her ankles twisting, her hands raw from catching herself against the rough rock walls. A heavy, oppressive stillness settled in, and the air grew thick, electric. Abby tasted dust and iron. A low rumble echoed through the canyon, vibrating in her chest. It was not the wind. "Thunder," she whispered, her voice tight with a new fear. Tahan stopped, tilting his head. He looked up, but there was no sky to see, only a sliver of bruised, churning purple far above. "The storm is here," he said, his voice flat. "We must find shelter, now." As if his words had summoned it, the wind changed. The low moan became a rising shriek. It funneled down the canyon, hitting them like a solid wall, driving a curtain of sand and grit before it. The pony screamed, a high, terrified sound, and reared, pulling the bridle from Tahan's grasp. It backed into the canyon wall, its eyes white, its hooves striking sparks from the stone. "Whoa, easy," Tahan said, his voice a low, calming rumble. He did not rush. He moved toward the animal slowly, speaking to it in his own language, the words soft and flowing. Abby pressed herself flat against the opposite wall, shielding her face as the sand stung her cheeks like needles. This was the fury of the desert she had only glimpsed from the wagon. It was a raw, blind, elemental power. The air was so thick with dust she could barely breathe. The thunder cracked again, this time directly overhead. A flash of lightning illuminated the canyon in a stark, terrifying tableau: the panicked horse, the unmoving man, and the swirling vortex of sand. Tahan got his hand on the bridle, pulling the pony's head down, forcing it to face his chest. He held it there, his body shielding its eyes, his voice a constant, soothing murmur until the animal's shivers subsided into trembling. He scanned the wall near them. His eyes narrowed against the stinging wind. He pointed. There. Abby looked. She saw nothing but rock. He pulled the pony forward, forcing it against the wind, and led them into a deep alcove, a hollow in the rock face barely 10 feet deep and half as wide. It was not a cave, but it was sheltered, the wind screaming past the opening instead of pouring in. Tahan tethered the horse in the deepest part of the hollow, then unslung a heavy, rolled-up hide from its back. Abby recognized it as a buffalo robe. He wedged one end of it into a crack in the rock and braced the other with his rifle and a few large stones, creating a low, sloping roof that blocked the worst of the swirling sand. He knelt, pulling a small pouch from his belt. With a flint and steel, he struck a spark into a piece of dried fungus, nursing it carefully, shielding it with his body. In moments, he had a tiny, smokeless fire going. Using dry twigs he seemed to produce from nowhere. The small flame was a miracle of warmth and light in the howling darkness. He took a strip of dried meat from his pouch, heated it over the flame until it sizzled, and handed it to her. He pushed the water skin into her other hand. Abby sat huddled, her back against the rock, and ate. The meat was tough and salty, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. She watched him. He moved with an economy of motion, a competence that was both reassuring and intimidating. He was not a cold warrior. He was a provider. He was taking care of her. The thought confused her, weakening her defenses more than the fear had. The storm broke in its full fury. The sandstorm became a deluge, icy rain mixing with the grit, turning the air into a roaring, liquid sandpaper. The temperature plummeted. The small fire hissed, fighting against the damp, cold air that crept into their shelter. Abby's thin dress was soaked through with sweat, dust, and now rain. A shiver started in her spine and spread. A deep, uncontrollable tremor. Her teeth began to chatter. She wrapped her arms around her knees, trying to make herself small, trying to hold in a warmth that was already gone. She was so cold, colder than she had ever been. Tahan sat across the small fire, his own heavy buckskin shirt damp, but his body still and quiet. He watched her for a long moment, his face unreadable in the flickering light. He saw her shivering, the violent, racking quakes that shook her small frame. With a sigh that was almost soundless, he untied the thong at his neck and pulled his heavy outer tunic, a thick, sleeveless garment of hide and fur, over his head. He was left in just his leggings and a thin cotton shirt. He did not hand the garment to her. Instead, he wrapped it around his own shoulders, a cloak of warmth, and shifted his position, sitting with his back against the rock wall where she sat. He settled himself, then looked forward into the fire, leaving a space between his body and the edge of the robe. Abby stared at the gap. It was an invitation, an offering of shared warmth, but it meant sitting beside him, touching him, deliberately. Her shivering was so bad she could barely think. Her pride, her fear, her upbringing, all of it was at war with the simple, animal need for warmth. To accept was to cross a line. To refuse was to risk freezing. She looked at his profile. He was not looking at her. He was giving her the choice. Her voice was a thin, chattering whisper, lost in the roar of the wind. She tried again, forcing the words out. "Sir," she began, and the words sounded strange, formal, and absurd. Tahan went rigid, his head turned, just slightly. He had hurt her. Abby's cheeks flushed hot, a bizarre contrast to the ice in her limbs. She did not know why she had called him that. It was the word she used for her father, for the wagon master, for any man in authority, but it felt different. Saying it to him. "Sir," she whispered again, "may I slip under your coat?" Tahan was still for a full 10 seconds. He had been called many things by her people: savage, dog, redskin, never sir. The simple, respectful word from this terrified white girl struck him harder than a bullet. It was a sign of a world turned upside down. Slowly, Without a word, he lifted the heavy edge of the fur-lined hide. Abby hesitated for one more heartbeat, then slid the short distance, her hip and shoulder pressing against his. He lowered the cloak, and it fell over her, enveloping them both. The effect was instantaneous. The heat from his body was a living thing, a shocking, solid presence. It poured into her, calming the worst of the shivers. The space was incredibly intimate. She was pressed against him from shoulder to knee. She could smell the faint, clean scent of wood smoke, of leather, and a dry, dusty male scent that was uniquely his. Through the layers of hide and cloth, she could feel the steady, slow rhythm of his breathing. The solid, unyielding muscle of his side. She could hear his heartbeat, a low, powerful drum beneath her ear. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the storm scream outside their small haven. The air between them was thick, charged with the unspoken, the impossible. This was wrong, by every rule she had ever known. This was a sin. She was huddled against a heathen, a killer, but her body, in its desperate honesty, felt nothing but warmth and a profound, terrifying safety. "I used to dream," Abby said, her voice muffled in the fur, "of running away. Not like this." Tahan did not move, but she felt his attention focus on her. "My father," she continued, the confession spilling out of her, carried on the strange intimacy of the darkness. "He wanted me to be a wife, a proper, silent wife. But I wanted to learn. I wanted to read books, not just the Bible, books about stars and the ocean and just the world. I used to hide them under my mattress. I dreamed I would go to a city back east, maybe get a job, be a teacher, choose my own life, choose my own husband." Her voice broke on the last word, the shame of the letter, the reality of Major Briggs, choking her. Tahan remained silent, but his stillness was an invitation to continue. "He told me I was wicked," she whispered, "that pride was a sin, that my place was to be obedient. He sent me here to be satisfied." She spat the word. "I was so afraid of this land, so afraid of your people, but I was just as afraid of the life I was being sent to." Tahan let the silence stretch. Then he spoke, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "When I was a boy, this canyon was not a place of fear. We would come here to find eagle feathers for ceremonies. The wind sang songs. It did not scream." He shifted, his shoulder moving against hers. "It was 15 winters when I saw the iron horse. It came across the plain, breathing black smoke. It cut the world in half. The buffalo, they would not cross the tracks. The herds broke apart. They vanished." He paused. "My grandfather took me to our most sacred valley, a place where the spirits are supposed to speak from the rocks. The white men were there. They were plowing it, tinging up the graves of my ancestors to plant corn. My grandfather put his hands over his face, and he wept. He was the strongest man I ever knew. I had never seen him weep. That was the day my life as a boy ended." Abby listened, her own small, private grief suddenly feeling thin and pale next to his. His was the loss of a world. Hers was the loss of a dream. But they were both losses. She felt a strange, unwelcome kinship with him. She leaned her head back against the stone, the shared cloak rising and falling with his breath. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I do not want your sorrow," he said, his voice hard, but not unkind. "I want your strength. You will need it." He was right. She felt a pang of guilt. She was safe, warm, protected by a man her people would hang. She was betraying her race, her faith, just by sitting here, just by feeling relieved. And he, too, was drawn to her. This small, pale creature. She was nothing like the strong women of his people, but she had a different kind of strength, resilience. He had seen her walk through the dust for miles without complaint. He had heard her speak to him with courage, even when she was terrified. He was attracted to that spirit, and it angered him. There was no path for them. She was a white woman, the intended target of his enemy. To feel anything for her was a weakness, a betrayal of his own. A long, mournful howl cut through the sound of the storm. Abby stiffened, her fingers instinctively clenching the fur of the cloak. "What was that?" "Wolf," Tahan said. Another howl joined it, closer this time. She pressed herself tighter against him, her fear a sharp, cold spike. "Are they hungry?" "They smell the horse," he said. "Or us. Or maybe just old blood." He gently, almost imperceptibly, eased himself from under the cloak, leaving her suddenly cold. He picked up his pistol, checked the load, and stepped to the opening of the alcove. He was gone for only a minute. Abby heard the sharp crack of the pistol, a sound instantly swallowed by the storm. Then he was back, sliding into place beside her, pulling the heavy cloak back over them both. The warmth returned, and with it, the scent of gunpowder. "They are gone," he said. "They are cowards. They only hunt what is weak or alone." They sat in silence again. The fire was dying, reduced to a bed of glowing red embers. The storm was passing, its fury fading into a steady, cold rain. Abby was exhausted, her bones heavy with a fatigue that went deeper than just her body. Just as she was drifting into an uneasy sleep, Tahan moved. He picked up a piece of charcoal from the edge of the fire, on the flat stone wall beside them, in the faint red glow. He sketched a few simple, powerful lines. It was a horse. It had no saddle, no bridle. Its mane was wild, its head thrown back, its legs gathered for running. "Among my people," Tahan said, his voice very low. "This is a spirit horse. It is a horse that will not be broken. It would rather die than wear a saddle. It chooses its own path, even if it is a hard one." He looked at the drawing. "It runs for the freedom of running." Abby stared at the simple drawing, at the wild, free lines. It was beautiful. It was both of them. He, a warrior who would not be broken by the white man's reservations. And she. A small, watery smile touched her lips. "Maybe," she whispered, her eyes growing heavy. "Maybe I'm just learning how to run." She fell asleep like that, lulled by the dying storm and the impossible heat of the man beside her. Her head slumped, resting against his shoulder. Tahan remained awake for a long time, his body rigid, fighting a battle inside himself. Finally, exhaustion claimed him too. He let his own head rest back against the rock. Outside, the wind and rain lashed the canyon. Inside the small shelter, under the shared buffalo robe, the Comanche warrior and the preacher's daughter slept, their backs pressed together for warmth. It was not a gesture of passion, but something far rarer and more fragile. It was the first, hesitant beginning of trust. The world was washed clean. When Abby woke, it was to a silence so profound it felt like a sound. The storm had passed. She was stiff, her cheek imprinted with the pattern of Tahan's buckskin shirt. She had, at some point, slumped fully against him. She pulled away as if burned, scrambling from under the heavy robe. Tahan was already awake, his eyes clear, watching her. A wave of heat rushed up her neck, a deep, scarlet blush of shame and confusion. She had slept in the arms of a savage. She had asked to. Tahan stood, stretching the cold stiffness from his muscles, his movements fluid as a cat. He offered no comment, made no sign that anything unusual had passed between them. He simply doused the last of the embers and began to saddle the weary pony. They emerged from the canyon into a world of blinding light. The sun, newly risen, struck the wet sand and red rock, making it glitter. The air was cool, fresh, and free of dust. It was beautiful, and the beauty felt like a betrayal of the horror that had brought them here. They walked for most of the morning, Tahan leading the pony, Abby walking beside him. The memory of the night, of the shared warmth under the buffalo robe, hung between them. A secret, that neither knew how to acknowledge. Once, their hands brushed as he passed her the water skin. She flinched, and he saw it. He looked away, his jaw tightening. He did not look at her when he spoke. "My sister's moccasins will fit you," he said. "Your shoes are finished." Abby looked down at the tattered leather slippers her father had bought for the journey. They were shredded, her feet bleeding and raw underneath. She just nodded, too tired and too overwhelmed to speak. In the early afternoon, Tahan stopped. He knelt in the damp sand of a shallow wash. He was not looking for water. He was looking at the ground. Abby stopped behind him, watching his back. He was completely, utterly still. "What is it?" she asked. He did not answer. He motioned her closer. She knelt beside him. In the damp earth were tracks, many of them, but these were not the soft, round prints of his unshod pony. They were deep, sharp-edged crescents. "Iron shoes," Tahan said, his voice a low growl. "Soldiers." He pointed. A few feet away, half buried in the sand, was the sodden butt of a cigar, and near it, winking in the sun, was a small, brass cylinder, a shell casing. "They were here," Abby whispered, her blood running cold. "After the storm." "Haul away," Tahan said. "He knew I would come through the canyon. He waited for the storm to pass, and he followed. He is not far behind." Abby looked back over her shoulder, but the vast, empty plain offered no comfort, no sign of pursuit. It only made her feel more exposed. "He is hunting us." "He is hunting me," Tahan corrected, his eyes dark. "He is under orders to kill you. You are a witness Briggs cannot allow to live." The truth of his words settled on her. A physical weight. The danger was not over. It had just been waiting for the rain to stop. Tahan stood, his body radiating a new, coiled tension. He led the pony at a faster pace, climbing a high, rocky mesa that dominated the landscape. The ascent was grueling. Abby's lungs burned, and her raw feet slipped on the rock. But Tahan did not slow. He pulled her up when she stumbled, his grip impatient. When they reached the summit, he paused, letting the pony breathe. He pointed to the north, across a wide, shallow valley. "There," he said, "my people." Abby squinted against the sun. At first, she saw nothing. Then, as her eyes adjusted, she saw the camp. It was not the collection of crude huts she had imagined. It was a village. Dozens of tall, conical lodges, made of pale, painted skins, stood in a great circle. A thin haze of blue wood smoke rose from their peaks. A vast herd of ponies, hundreds of them, grazed on the far side of a creek. She saw dogs and children. She could hear them, their high-pitched laughs and shouts carrying on the clear air. They were playing, running between the teepees just as children did back home. It was alive. It was a home. The image clashed so violently with the propaganda of the Red Devils that her mind reeled. These were the people who had supposedly butchered the wagon train. But Tahan was one of them, and Tahan had saved her. She was filled with a sudden, strange curiosity, but it was quickly swallowed by a wave of cold fear. She was a white woman, the only white woman. She was walking into a camp of warriors whose families had been murdered by men who looked just like her. As they descended into the valley, two riders broke from the pony herd and galloped toward them. They reined in their horses in a spray of sand, blocking their path. They were young men, their faces hard, their eyes suspicious. They carried rifles, and their chests were bare. They spoke in their own language, the words harsh and guttural. They were not speaking to Abby. They were speaking to Tahan, their anger clear. They gestured at her, their expressions a mixture of contempt and disbelief. One of them, his face scarred, looked at Abby and spat on the ground near her feet. He then turned his fury back to Tahan. "You walk on two legs, Tahan," he shouted, switching to the harsh, broken English he had learned at the forts. "You talk peace with the bluecoats. You leave our camp for weeks. And now you come back. You bring this a white-eye woman. Is she your pet?" The scarred warrior reached out, grabbing for the bridle of Tahan's pony. "Give me your rifle. 2 legs. You are not a warrior. You are a scout for the whites." Tahan did not move. He did not raise his voice. He simply knocked the man's hand away with a movement so fast Abby barely saw it. "I am a warrior of this people. Kala," Tahan said, his voice lethally quiet. "And you will not touch my rifle. And you will not touch her." The tension was so thick Abby could taste it. The warriors tensed, their hands moving to their own weapons. Abby was certain they were about to be shot. "Tahan." The voice was deep and cracked with age, carrying an authority that stopped the young warriors in their tracks. A man was walking from the center of the camp, pushing through the gathering crowd of women and children. He was old, his face a map of deep wrinkles, his hair white and bound in 2 long braids. He wore a magnificent feathered headdress that he did not remove. This was Red Elk. He stopped 10 feet from them, his dark eyes, filmed with age but still sharp as obsidian, fixed on Abby. He ignored Tahan completely. He looked at her as if she were a snake. "You have brought a white snake into our lodges." "Tahan," Red Elk said, his voice a harsh rasp. He still had not looked at his kinsman. "She brings the smell of the soldier." "She is a witness," Tahan said, his voice respectful but firm. "She saw Briggs' men, dressed as warriors, attack her own people. She is the proof we need to stop this war before it begins." "Proof," Red Elk sneered. "Her word, the word of a white woman. It is a trick. She is a spy, or she is bait." He pointed a gnarled finger at Abby. "The soldiers hunt her. They will follow her tracks here. You have led them to our camp. You have brought this death to our children." Abby shrank back. The women and children were pressing closer now, their faces a sea of open curiosity and a deep, unsettling hatred. They murmured, pointing at her torn, pale dress, her light hair. She was an alien, a creature from another world. "We should tie her," Red Elk declared, his voice rising. "We give her to the soldiers when they come. We tell them we captured her. They will be grateful. They will give us guns. They will give us the whiskey and flour they promised." The elder's words emboldened a young boy, no more than 7. He picked up a small, sharp-edged stone and threw it. It struck Abby on the arm, cutting her skin. She cried out, a small, sharp sound of pain and shock. She looked around, her eyes wide with panic. Yesterday, she was prey among her own people. Today, she was prey among these. There was no safety, there was no one to trust. She was utterly, terribly alone. In that instant, Tahan moved. He dismounted in one fluid motion, placing himself directly in front of Abby, shielding her with his body. He faced the crowd. He faced the warriors. He faced Red Elk. His hand was not on his gun. His arms were at his sides. But his presence was electric. "She is not a prisoner," he said, his voice low but cutting through the noise of the crowd. "She is a witness. She is under my protection." He turned his head just enough to look at Red Elk. "If you call her a prisoner, then I am her sponsor. If you wish to trade her to the men who murdered our families, you will have to step over my body first." The crowd went utterly silent. The finality of the words, the challenge, was unmistakable. Tahan had just drawn a line in the dust, pitting himself against his own elder, his own people, for her, for a white woman. Abby felt her heart stop, then restart with a painful thud. He was staking his life on her. He was risking everything. A young woman pushed through the line of disapproving older women. She was tall, with Tahan's same high cheekbones and intelligent, dark eyes. She wore a simple doe-skin dress, and she moved with a confidence that Abby envied. "He is my brother, old man," she said, her voice clear and strong, speaking to Red Elk. "And he is a warrior, not a traitor. Would you trade a human life for the white man's poison whiskey and rotten blankets? Have we become them?" She turned to Abby, her gaze sharp, appraising. It was not a kind look, but it was not filled with hate. It was curious. She spoke in broken, halting English. "You, come." She was Ayanna, Tahan's sister. She grabbed Abby's good arm, the one that was not bleeding, and pulled her forward. The crowd parted, their murmurs following them, but no one moved to stop them. Ayanna led her away from the confrontation, away from Tahan and Red Elk, who remained locked in a silent, furious battle of wills. Ayanna pulled her into one of the teepees. The light inside was dim, golden, filtering through the painted hide. It was clean and spacious, smelling of wood smoke and dried herbs. Furs were piled neatly. Ayanna pointed to a pile of soft rabbit skins. "Sit." Abby sat, her legs trembling. Ayanna examined her arm, her touch surprisingly gentle. She clicked her tongue at the sight of Abby's ruined feet. She left and returned moments later with a wooden bowl filled with a thick, savory stew and a horn cup of water. She also brought a pair of soft moccasins and a wet cloth. As Abby ate, Ayanna sat across from her, watching. "Why did you come?" Ayanna asked. Abby's throat was thick. Tahan, saved me. Men from the fort, soldiers, attacked my wagon. They were dressed as your people. They killed everyone. He saved me." Ayanna's face did not change. "Yes, this is the white man's way. They speak of peace, and they bring the knife. They sign the paper, and then they steal the land the paper promised." She leaned forward. "They say we are savages. 3 winters ago, soldiers came to our winter camp. They said peace. They gave whiskey. When our warriors were drunk, the soldiers took 2 girls, my cousins. We found them in the snow 2 days later." She looked at Abby, her eyes hard. "So you understand. We do not love your people. We do not trust your color. My brother trusts me. He still believes there is a path. I think he is a fool, but he is my brother." Abby looked down at the stew. She suddenly understood the hatred, the stone, the anger. It was not a blind, savage fury. It was a pain so deep it had become a part of their bones. And she was the face of the people who had caused it. Outside, the confrontation had broken up, but the village was not settled. As evening fell and cook fires were lit, the men gathered. The talk was of Tahan, and of the white woman, and it was of the bounty. The news had traveled faster than Tahan. News of $500, a fortune that could buy many rifles, much ammunition, food for the long, hard winter that was coming. Some of the younger warriors, the ones whose bellies were empty and whose hearts were full of hate, looked at Tahan with new, calculating eyes. Later that night, long after the camp was quiet, Red Elk slipped from his teepee. He walked to a high bluff overlooking the valley. He built a small fire, carefully feeding it with green leaves to make it smoke. He held a blanket over it, releasing the smoke in 3 short, precise puffs, then 1 long one, a signal. Miles away, in the darkness, Jake Holloway saw the smoke against the stars. He grinned. The old man was predictable. He was making his own deal, to save his people in his own way. And Jake was more than happy to use it to walk right into Tahan's trap. A rider appeared on the ridge at noon the next day. Not a Comanche, but a man on a mule, slumped low in the saddle. Luis. The Mexican freighter was a common sight in these parts, welcome in few places but tolerated in most. He was one of the invisible men, the ones who moved between worlds, seeing and hearing everything. He rode directly to Tahan's teepee, his face grim, and dismounted before the mule had fully stopped. "Amigo," Luis said, his voice low, skipping the pleasantries. He wiped the dust from his mustache. "It is bad. At the fort, at Dusk Creek, it is all bad." Tahan, Ayanna, and Abby gathered inside the lodge, the air suddenly tight. "What have you heard, Luis?" Tahan asked. "Major Briggs. He is a snake, but a loud snake," Luis said. He has sent riders to every fort, every settlement. The telegraph wires are singing with his words. Massacre, he says. Brutal Comanche attack. He names you, Tahan. He says you led the raid, murdered civilians. And this is the part that makes them crazy. You stole the major's innocent white bride. Abby flinched as if struck, her face pale. He is not just talking, Luis continued, accepting a waterskin from Ayanna. He is gathering troops, not just his own cavalry. He has put out the call for volunteers, militia from the settlements. He is promising bounties. He is building an army. He is not coming for a parley. Tahan, he is coming for a cleansing. He is coming to wipe this village off the map. Silence, thick and cold, filled the teepee. The playing of the children outside sounded impossibly distant. He will use this, Tahan said, his voice a low growl. He will use this lie to justify a war he has always wanted. He will not stop until we are all driven out or buried. Ayanna looked at her brother, her eyes flashing. Then we will fight. We will not be slaughtered like my cousins. Fight, Luis said, shaking his head. He is coming with maybe 200 men, maybe more. He has cannons from the fort. You have, 50 warriors. This is not a fight, Ayanna. It is a funeral. He is right, Tahan said. To fight them here, with our women and children, is to die. We cannot win. Then we run, Ayanna said. And run where? Tahan countered, his voice rising in frustration. To the high mountains, to starve in the snow. There is no land left to run to. There is one chance, Abby said, her voice quiet but clear. They all turned to look at her. She stood straighter than they had ever seen her. He is not the only commander. At the wagon train, the soldiers spoke of him. They said he was in charge at Fort Stanton, but that the real commander, the man in charge of the whole territory, was at Fort Union, a Colonel Mason. They said he was a fair man, an honorable man. Tahan and Luis exchanged a look. They had heard of Mason. He was a career soldier, an old man who had fought in the big war back east, a man who, it was rumored, disliked Briggs's brutal methods. A white man's honor, Ayanna spat. It is a slim chance, Tahan said, more to himself than to her. But it is the only one. He looked at Abby. Your word. Against a major in the United States Army. My word, Abby said. And what I saw, the men were white. They wore paint, but they were not your people. They had beards. One of them had a cavalry tattoo on his arm, a snake and a flag. I saw it when his sleeve rode up. Tahan's eyes narrowed. A detail. Good. What else? Jake Holloway, Luis added. I saw him at the fort, too, before I left. He was drunk, spending money. He was the one who found the bodies. He is the one leading the hunt for you. He is Briggs's right hand. The plan is clear. Then, Tahan said, his mind moving fast. We cannot stay here. We cannot fight. We must ride. We must get to Fort Union. We must get to Colonel Mason. You, Abby, you will tell him what you saw. I will tell him what I know of Briggs's land deals, of the murder of my uncle. Luis, you can testify to the lies being spread at the fort. It is a fool's errand, a deep voice boomed from the teepee entrance. Red Elk stood there, his face a mask of thunder. He had been listening. You would put our fate in the hands of another white general. You would run to him like a beaten dog. Old man, Tahan said, stepping forward. You would have us stay here and be slaughtered. You would ask our children to stop cannonballs with their bodies. I would ask us to fight as Comanche, Red Elk roared, stepping inside. The lodge seemed to shrink around him. I would ask us to die as warriors, not as beggars in a white man's court. You are a fool. Tahan, you have always been a fool, with your talk of two worlds. There is only one world, ours and theirs, and they will not stop until they have it all. I will not lead our people into a massacre, Tahan said, his voice low and final. I will not be the man who gets them all killed for the sake of pride. The conflict was bare, laid open for all to see, the old way versus the new, the warrior's path versus the diplomat's. Tahan felt himself torn. A part of him, the part that had seen his uncle fall, screamed for battle. It was the easy path, to draw his knife, to paint his face, to meet the soldiers in the canyon and die in a blaze of glory. It was what his instincts cried out for. But another part, the part that had seen Abby's terror, the part that heard the children playing outside, knew that to fight was to condemn them all, to save his people. He had to betray the very instincts that made him a warrior. He had to trust, and he had to trust a white woman, and a white general. It felt like swallowing poison. "There will be a council fire tonight," Red Elk declared, his eyes cold. "We will let the spirits and the people decide. And she," he pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Abby, "will be judged." The camp was tense all afternoon. Men sharpened knives. Women packed food and belongings, not knowing if they were preparing for a journey or a siege. The young warriors, the ones who had listened to Red Elk, watched Tahan with open hostility. When night fell, the great central fire was lit. The entire village gathered, their faces painted in the flickering orange light. The drums began. A low, ominous heartbeat. Abby, wearing the moccasins and a simple doe-skin dress Ayanna had given her, was led to the center of the circle. She stood alone, facing Red Elk and the other elders. Tahan and Ayanna stood on the edge of the circle, watching, forbidden to speak unless called upon. "White woman," Red Elk's voice boomed over the drums. "You come to our village, and death follows you like a shadow. You are the bait in a trap set by your own kind. Why should we not send you back to them? Why should we let you bring the soldiers down to our houses?" Abby looked at the faces, a sea of suspicion and deep, earned hatred. Her knees were weak. She could barely breathe. She thought of her father. She thought of Major Briggs. She thought of the letter. She was a commodity, a thing to be traded, here just as she had been in the white world. "Speak," Red Elk commanded. "Are you a spy? Are you here to help your soldier husband find us?" Abby looked up, her eyes finding Tahan's in the crowd. He was still, his face carved from stone, but his eyes were locked on hers, willing her to be strong. She took a breath, and she spoke. "I am not a spy," she said, her voice shaking, but carrying in the silence. "And Major Briggs is not my husband. He is my jailer, and he is your enemy." She told them everything. She did not plead. She did not beg. She just testified. "My own father sold me," she said, the shame burning in her throat, but she did not hide it. "He sold me to Major Briggs for money. That is the letter I carried. I was not a bride. I was livestock." A murmur went through the women in the crowd. They understood this. "And Major Briggs," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "He did not want a wife. He wanted a prize, a thing to make him look respectable. And to get the land, he needed a war. So he created one. I saw it. I saw his men, dressed in paint, dressed like you. I saw them shoot my people. I saw them set fire to my wagon. And then I saw Tahan. He was not one of them. He was fighting them. He saved me." She looked directly at Red Elk. "You think I am the snake? My people are the snakes. My race, they lie. They steal. They murder. They murdered my people just to have an excuse to murder yours. I have nowhere else to go. My own kind are hunting me. If you kill me here, I understand. But I am not your enemy. Your enemy is Major Harlan Briggs, and I am the only one who can prove it." She was crying now, silent tears of shame and rage and exhaustion tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. She stood exposed, her humiliation and her truth laid bare for them all. The drumming stopped. The silence was absolute. Ayanna stepped forward from the crowd. She walked to Abby's side and stood next to her, facing Red Elk. It was a simple, powerful gesture. Then one of the younger warriors, the one who had spat at her, Kala, stepped forward. He looked at Abby, his face filled with a new, complex understanding. He nodded once, then stepped back. The tide was turning. Her raw, painful honesty had done what no argument from Tahan could have. She had not spoken to them as a white woman, but as another victim of the same man. Tahan watched, his heart tight in his chest. He had seen her as a frightened girl, a little bird, as he had called her. But this was a woman. She was facing down an entire tribe, armed with nothing but the truth. His respect for her, a feeling he had been fighting, bloomed into something new, something dangerously close to admiration. Red Elk saw the shift. He saw his power, his call for war, draining away, replaced by the foolish, slim hope this white woman offered. He said nothing. He simply turned, his face dark, and walked away from the fire, back to his lodge. The council was over. Tahan's plan was the only one left. The small group gathered in Ayana's teepee. Tahan, Abby, Luis, and Ayana herself. "We ride at dawn," Tahan said. "We will take the fastest ponies. We will ride north, through the broken lands. It is the only way to Fort Union." "It is a ride of 3 days, if we are lucky," Luis said, checking his pistol. "And Holloway will be watching." "He will be watching the main trails," Tahan said. "He will not expect us to ride to another fort. He thinks I am running or hiding. He does not know I am attacking." But Tahan was wrong. Later that night, long after the camp was wrapped in an uneasy sleep, Red Elk slipped from his teepee. He was a shadow among shadows, his heart a cold stone of certainty. Tahan was a fool. This girl was a lie. This plan was suicide. There was only one way to get the weapons his people needed to survive. He had to make the trade himself. He had to save his people from Tahan's foolish, good heart. He climbed the high bluff overlooking the valley, the one Jake Holloway had been watching. He built a small, careful fire. He held his blanket over it, releasing the smoke. 3 short, quick puffs. "I have her. 1 long, slow plume. Bring the guns. We trade." Miles away, in a dark, cold camp, Jake Holloway saw the signal against the stars. A slow, cruel smile split his face. The old man was predictable. He was ready to sell the girl. "He is a fool," Jake whispered to the night air. He had no intention of bringing guns. He had no intention of trading. He now knew exactly where Tahan was, and he knew Tahan would be forced to run. He knew the path Tahan would have to take. He kicked the man sleeping by the fire. "Get up! We are moving! Saddle the horses! They are running right into our arms!" He was not just going to catch Tahan. He was going to wait for him, in the one canyon Tahan could not avoid. The world was a wash of gray and charcoal when they left. A low mist clung to the creek bed, muffling the sound of their ponies' hooves. The village was silent, asleep, or pretending to be. Abby, riding behind Tahan, her arms wrapped around his waist, felt as if she were leaving the only solid ground she had found. His back was warm and solid against her chest. Ayana, riding beside them on her own mare, gave them a look, a small, knowing smile that was more mockery than humor. "You ride close, white girl," she said, her voice low. "Trying to keep him warm, or trying to keep him from running." Abby flushed, loosening her grip, but Tahan's hand briefly covered hers, pressing it back against his stomach. "She rides as I tell her," he said, his voice flat, ending the conversation. Luis, his face impassive, rode 20 yards ahead, his eyes scanning the ridges, his rifle resting across his lap. They rode north into a maze of shattered red rock canyons and dry arroyos. The land was broken, hostile, a place to get lost, but Tahan moved through it with a confidence that calmed Abby's nerves. He was a part of this land. He knew its secrets. By mid-morning, they entered a narrow pass, the walls rising sheer on both sides. Luis had stopped at the entrance, his head tilted, listening. He held up a hand, then motioned them on, his face tight. I do not like it, he whispered as they passed. It is too quiet. This canyon echoes. They were halfway through when the quiet broke. The first shot was a sharp crack, magnified by the canyon walls into a cannon blast. A puff of red dust exploded from the rock face, inches from Luis's head. "Ambush!" he roared, kicking his mule into a desperate run. The air filled with noise. Gunfire erupted from the ridges above them, a cascade of lead and splintered stone. Bullets whined, ricocheting off the walls. Ayana screamed as her horse reared, nearly throwing her. Luis cried out, a sharp, choked sound. He slumped in his saddle, his hand clutching his left shoulder, blood welling dark and fast between his fingers. His rifle clattered to the ground. "Go!" he shouted. "Go! I am hit!" Tahan did not hesitate. He grabbed the bridle of Ayana's panicked horse, pulling her along, while kicking his own pony into a gallop. The ground was treacherous, littered with boulders. Abby clung to him, her eyes squeezed shut, her face buried in his back. "There!" Tahan yelled, pointing. "A crevice in the rock, 20 yards. Abby opened her eyes just in time to see a glint of metal from the cliff high above. To her right, a man, silhouetted against the sky, was leveling his rifle. Not at Tahan, but at her. She had no time to scream. Tahan saw it, too. His reaction was not a thought, but an animal reflex. With a roar, he unhandled Ayana's bridle and used his right arm to shove Abby with all his strength. She was torn from the horse, flying through the air, landing in a painful, breathless heap in the sand and gravel. She looked up, gasping, just as Tahan's body arched. A violent, unnatural spasm. He grunted, a deep, punched-out sound. A dark stain appeared on his right side, just above his belt. He stayed on the horse, swaying, but his rifle was already in his hands. He fired 3 times, rapid shots, up at the ridge, forcing the gunman to take cover. "Ayana Luis the rocks," he commanded, his voice strained. He spurred his horse the last few feet, leaping from the saddle and pulling the animal into the narrow fissure, a deep, natural shelter in the canyon wall. Ayana and Luis tumbled in after him, dragging the other mounts. Tahan slumped against the rock, his face pale, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The dark spot on his side was spreading, turning his buckskin shirt black. "Tahan!" Abby screamed, scrambling to his side. "You are hit! You are bleeding!" "It is nothing," he gritted out, but his eyes were tight with pain. He was losing blood, fast. He looked at her, his gaze terrifyingly intense. He will come down. He will not wait. He fumbled at his belt and pulled out his spare pistol, a heavy Colt revolver. He shoved it into her hands. The metal was cold and impossibly heavy. "You know this," he demanded, his voice weak. "No, I have never—" Listen," he snapped, his hand gripping her wrist, his nails digging into her skin. "There is no time." He used his thumb to pull back the hammer, a loud, threatening click. "This is the trigger. You point, you pull. You do not close your eyes. You point, and you pull until it is empty. Do you understand me?" Abby stared at the gun, her whole body shaking. This was the tool of her salvation and the symbol of her deepest fears. She could not. "Abby!" His voice was a raw command. "Do you understand?" She nodded, her throat too dry to speak, her fingers numb on the wooden grip. "Good," he panted, slumping back. "Good." Well, Tahan," the voice echoed down from the canyon rim, amplified, conversational. It was Jake Holloway. He was invisible, hidden by the rocks, but his voice was everywhere. "You always did like to find a hole to hide in. Did you not, brother?" Tahan's head snapped up, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "Holloway, you son of a—" Ah, Jake's voice laughed. "Is that how you talk to your old friend?" The man who shared your father's fire, I am hurt. Tahan? Truly. Ayana was ripping a strip of cloth from her dress, pressing it against Luis's bleeding shoulder. Luis, his face gray, just shook his head, his eyes on Tahan. What do you want, Jake? Tahan called out, his voice weaker than he wanted. I want what I am paid for, Jake shouted back. I want the bounty on your head, but I am a generous man. I am feeling sentimental. Give me the girl. Just push her out. You and your sister. And the Mexican you can ride away. I will even give you your horses back. Just give me the girl. Go to hell, Ayana screamed, her voice raw with hate. She is the one. Jake's voice turned colder, losing its mocking tone. The Major wants her. She is the witness. You're just meat. Give her to me. Tahan, or we come down there and kill you all. It is a simple choice. She is not for you, Jake, Tahan said, trying to push himself upright, his rifle in his lap. No, a pity, Jake mused. You know, this reminds me of your father. He was a proud man, too stupidly proud. He took me in, called me son when my own people threw me out, tame a white boy. He thought, show everyone how big his heart was. Tahan went rigid. Do not, he whispered. Do not speak of him. But he was not a good judge of character. Jake's voice rose, filled with a sudden, sharp venom. He trusted the wrong men. He trusted the agents. He trusted me. It was a cold night when he walked into that peace parley. He really thought they were bringing flour. He did not even see me, standing there with the soldiers, until the first volley hit him. Ayana stopped breathing. Tahan's face went blank, a terrifying, empty mask of shock. Then it contorted with a rage so pure it was silent. You, Tahan said. It was you. He looked right at me. Tahan. Jake laughed, the sound bouncing off the stone. He had this surprised look on his face, like a child. Then he fell. You were not there. You were off chasing horses, but I was there. I watched him die. And now I am going to watch you die. Tahan roared. It was not a word. It was a sound of pure, primal agony and hatred. He brought his rifle up, his whole body shaking with the effort, trying to get a shot at a man he could not see. He was too weak. The rifle barrel wavered, and he slumped against the rock, his eyes closing, his breath a wet gasp. Tahan! Abby shrieked. A shape moved on the ridge. Jake Holloway, impatient, stepped out from behind a boulder, his own rifle raised, aiming down into the crevice for the finishing shot. This is the end, brother, he said. Abby saw it. She saw the man. She saw the rifle. She saw Tahan, slumped and helpless, his eyes fluttering. The terror that had frozen her for her entire life suddenly vanished, replaced by a white-hot, singular fire. She was not a preacher's daughter. She was not a commodity. She was a woman protecting her own. She did not remember Tahan's instructions. She did not aim. She simply raised the heavy pistol with both hands, pointed it at the shape on the ridge, and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The recoil slammed her back against the rock, numbing her entire arm. A high, shocked scream echoed through the canyon. It was not a death cry. It was a scream of pain and rage. Jake Holloway staggered back, dropping his rifle, his hand clamped to his own shoulder. Bitch, he howled. The white bitch shot me. Gunfire erupted from the ridge, but it was wild, panicked, uncontrolled. Now, Luis bellowed. Despite his own wound, he had been bracing his feet against a large, precariously balanced boulder at the edge of their crevice. With a grunt, he shoved it with all his remaining strength. The boulder teetered, then fell, crashing onto the canyon floor and dislodging a cascade of smaller rocks and scree. It was a miniature avalanche, a cloud of dust and noise. At the same instant, Ayana, her face a mask of fury, lit a small, tightly bound bundle of dried grasses and phosphorus. She threw it out of the crevice. It landed in a dry bush, which exploded in a plume of thick, oily black smoke. "More is coming," one of Jake's men shouted from above, his voice high with panic. "It is a signal. The whole tribe is here." "Shoot, shoot them!" Jake roared, but his voice was strained with pain. The shooting became sporadic. They were confused, firing at the smoke, at the dust, at shadows. "Our chance," Ayanna hissed. She grabbed Tahan, pulling his arm over her shoulder. "Abby, help me." Together, they hauled Tahan's dead weight onto his pony. He was unconscious, his head lolling. Abby scrambled up behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist, her body acting as a brace to keep him from falling. Ayanna and Luis mounted their own horses. "Ride!" Ayanna yelled, slapping the rump of Tahan's pony. They burst from the crevice, from the cloud of smoke and dust, and galloped down the canyon, away from the trap. A few wild shots followed them, but they were already out of range. They rode, and they did not look back. They found it hours later, as the sun was setting, an old, abandoned stagecoach station, its adobe walls crumbling, its corral empty. It was a ruin, but it had a roof. Ayanna and Luis, both breathing hard from their own pain, helped Abby lower Tahan to the dusty floor. He was pale as death, his breathing shallow, his shirt and leggings soaked in blood. "We need to stop the bleeding," Ayanna said, her voice tight, her own face gray with concern for her brother. "Luis, water, Abby, the light." Abby fumbled, her hands still shaking from the recoil of the gun. She tore strips from her petticoat, her last good piece of clothing. Ayanna had a small pouch of herbs, which she packed into the wound, but the blood still seeped. Later that night, Luis and Ayanna slept, an exhausted, pain-filled sleep on the other side of the small room. Tahan was burning with fever, tossing his head, muttering in his own language. Abby sat beside him, wiping his face with a damp rag, her body one solid ache. She looked at him, at the strong, proud face now slack with pain and fever. He had taken a bullet for her. He had saved her, and she had shot a man. She felt no remorse, only a cold, hard fear that she would lose him. She leaned down, her hair falling around her face. Her hands were shaking. She had been crying, but her tears were dry now. She gently, almost reverently, pressed her lips to his forehead. It was a chaste, desperate kiss, a kiss of gratitude and a terrible, dawning affection. "You cannot die," she whispered against his hot skin, her voice fierce. "Do you hear me? Tahan, you cannot leave me. You saved me. Now you have to live. You have to live so we can tell them the truth. You must live." He did not stir, his breathing ragged in the cold. Desert night. Tahan's fever broke just before dawn. He woke with a gasp, his body drenched in a cold sweat, the fire in his blood suddenly gone, leaving only a vast, aching weakness. Abby was asleep, her head pillowed on her arm, her hand still loosely holding the rag she'd been using to cool his forehead. He lay still, looking at her in the gray light. She had shot a man for him. She had stayed by his side. This small, terrified creature from another world, she had whispered to him in the night, her voice fierce and pleading, "You must live." He had heard her. Through the red fog of the fever, he had heard her. Ayanna stirred, her face etched with pain from her own injuries and exhaustion. She looked at her brother, saw his eyes were clear, and let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 2 days. "He is back," she whispered. Luis, his arm in a crude sling, nodded. "Bueno, because we cannot stay here. Holloway's men will be searching. They know this is a way station." It took the 3 of them to get Tahan on his horse. He was conscious, but he had lost too much blood. He swayed in the saddle, his wound a throbbing agony, freshly packed with Ayanna's herbs. Abby, her own aches forgotten, mounted behind him, her arms once again becoming the brace that held him upright. They rode for another day, a slow, agonizing crawl toward Fort Union. Tahan, his head resting back against Abby's shoulder, guided them, his voice a hoarse whisper. Luis and Ayana rode with their rifles ready, their eyes scanning every ridge. They were a broken, desperate band, held together by nothing but the slim, foolish hope of a white man's justice. On the evening of the second day, they saw it, the railroad tracks, 2 lines of steel glinting in the sunset, and beyond them, the high adobe walls and the fluttering flag of Fort Union. "We made it," Abby whispered, her voice thick with relief. But as they drew closer, Tahan became rigid. He lifted his head, his senses, though dull with pain, screaming a warning. "What is it?" Abby asked. "The flag," he rasped. "It is the regimental standard, Mason's flag. But look at the gate." Men were pouring out of the main gate. Not a small patrol, but a full company of cavalry, forming a line, their carbines ready. They were blocking the entrance, and at their head, on a tall black charger, his uniform immaculate, his blond beard glowing in the setting sun, was Major Harlan Briggs. Beside him, his arm in a smart new sling, a cruel smile on his face, was Jake Holloway. "No," Abby breathed. "No, he cannot. This is not his fort." "He has taken it," Luis said, his voice grim, pulling his mule to a halt. "He got here first. He has lied. He has taken command." "It is a trap," Ayana hissed, pulling her horse around. "Brother, we must run." "Run where?" Tahan said, his voice hollow. He had no strength left. He could not lift his rifle. He could barely sit on his horse. They were surrounded. The line of soldiers was a steel wall. My! Briggs's voice boomed across the dusty parade ground, a voice of perfect, practiced concern. "Look what the wind has blown in, Miss Collins. My dear Abigail, praise God, you are alive." He trotted his horse forward, his face a mask of profound relief. He ignored Tahan, his eyes fixed on Abby, his gaze so proprietary, so owning, that she felt her skin crawl. "My poor, dear child," he said, reining in. "Look at you, filthy, in rags. What did this animal do to you?" He finally turned his gaze on Tahan, and his eyes were not human. They were the eyes of a snake, cold and dead. "Tahan," Briggs said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding growl. "You are under arrest for the massacre of the Miller wagon train, for the murder of 22 men, women, and children, and for the abduction and defilement of this innocent woman." "He is the one," Abby cried, her voice high and thin. "He lies. Tahan saved me." Briggs shook his head, a look of deep sorrow on his face. He addressed the soldiers, his voice carrying to every man. "You see, gentlemen, the savage mind. He has bewitched her. She is in shock, beside herself with terror. She does not know what she is saying." He looked back at Abby, his voice softening. "My dear, it is all right. You are safe now. You are with me." "He killed them!" Abby shrieked, struggling to dismount. "He dressed his men as Indians. I saw them." "Take them!" Briggs roared, his patience snapping. "Take the savage and his accomplices. Put them in the stockade. We will have a trial in the morning. A fast trial. And then a hanging. Get that woman to my quarters. Have her cleaned. She is unwell." Soldiers surged forward. Ayana and Luis were pulled from their horses, their weapons ripped from their hands. Tahan, too weak to resist, was dragged from the pony. He collapsed in the dust, and a soldier put a boot on his back, binding his hands. 2 rough-handed men seized Abby. "No!" she screamed, fighting, kicking. "You cannot, Tahan!" Abigail Briggs' voice was a whip crack. She froze. He rode closer, leaning down in his saddle. His voice was for her alone. "You will be silent. You will come with me, or I will have your red-skinned pet horsewhipped. Here, now, until he begs for the bullet. Do you understand me?" She stared into his cold blue eyes. She understood. She went limp, her fight draining away, replaced by a cold, calculating numbness. She allowed them to lead her away. They took her to the commander's house, Briggs's house. He had indeed taken over. Ayanna and Luis were thrown into the dark, filthy stockade. Tahan, bleeding and barely conscious, was chained to a post in the center of the parade ground, left like an animal for all to see. An hour later, Briggs entered the room where Abby sat, washed and dressed in a simple calico dress they had provided. He was carrying a tray with tea and biscuits. He smiled. The perfect host. "There now," he said, placing the tray on a table. "You look more like yourself. A terrible ordeal. But it is over." "You are a monster," she said, her voice flat. Briggs's smile did not falter. He sat opposite her. "I am a man of order. My dear, this is a wild land. It requires a firm hand. What happened on the wagon train was unfortunate. A necessity. Those people died so that thousands may live in peace. It is a simple calculation. You murdered them. I civilized this valley," he corrected her. "And I will have it. And I will have you." He leaned forward. "Which brings me to this. A small matter of paperwork." He produced a folded document and a pen. "This is a statement. Your testimony. It details how Tahan and his band of renegades attacked the wagons, how he murdered your companions, and how he forced himself upon you. You will sign it." "I will not." "Oh, you will," he said, his voice still light. "You see, I am a merciful man. Tahan is a strong specimen. He will die hard. Hanging can be slow, unpleasant, or he could be tied to a post and flogged for hours. Or, as my scout, Holloway, has suggested, we could use hot irons. He knows the Comanche way." Abby felt the bile rise in her throat. "But," Briggs continued, "if you sign this, if you stand by my side in the morning, if you confirm your testimony and agree to become my wife, I will grant him a soldier's death. A quick, clean firing squad. No pain, no torture. A simple, merciful end." He pushed the paper toward her. "It is your choice, my dear. His life or his agony." Abby looked at the paper. She looked at the pen. She saw Tahan's face, his eyes tight with pain as the bullet hit him. She saw him sketching the wild horse on the canyon wall. She heard her own voice, whispering for him to live. She picked up the pen. The doors to the room burst open. A young, frantic-looking soldier stood there, his face pale. "Major, sir, there is a problem." "What is it, Lieutenant?" Briggs snapped, his eyes flashing with anger at the interruption. "It is Colonel Mason. Sir, his patrol is back. They are at the gate. He was not due back for 2 weeks. Sir." Briggs' face, for the first time, lost its composure. He went pale. "What here now?" "He has heard rumors, sir," the lieutenant stammered. "He rode here from Santa Fe. He is demanding to know why you have assumed command of his fort." Briggs stood, knocking the chair over. He grabbed the paper. "Sign it," he hissed at Abby. "Sign it now." Abby looked at him, and for the first time in her life, she smiled. A cold, hard smile. She took the pen and she slowly, deliberately, drew a thick black line through the entire document. "No," she said. Briggs raised his hand to strike her, but the sound of heavy boots and a new, powerful voice stopped him. "Major Briggs, what is the meaning of this?" Colonel Mason stood in the doorway. He was an older man, tall, with a white mustache and clear, honest eyes. He looked at Briggs, at the overturned chair, and at Abby. "Colonel," Briggs said, snapping to attention, his voice recovering. "Thank God you are here. We have had a terrible—" "Save it, Major," Mason said, his voice like iron. "I have been hearing stories for the last 50 miles. Stories of massacres, of bounties, of a major playing God. Now, what is this?" He strode into the room. his eyes falling on Abby. "Young woman, who are you and why are you in this office?" "Sir," Abby said, standing, her voice shaking but strong. "My name is Abigail Collins, and this man, Major Briggs, is a murderer." "That is preposterous," Briggs shouted. "She is hysterical. Sir, she was abducted by—" "I was not," Abby shouted, her voice ringing with a power she did not know she possessed. She held up the other letter, her father's letter, which she had kept hidden. "I was sold. My father sold me to this man. Here is the proof he did not want a bride. He wanted a commodity." Mason took the letter, his eyes scanning it, his face darkening. "And he did not just buy me," Abby cried, the words tumbling out. "He murdered my wagon train to start a war. He dressed his men as Indians. I saw them. I saw his scout. Jake Holloway. Shoot survivors. And he—" She pointed at Tahan, who was being dragged onto the parade ground by guards. "He saved my life. He took a bullet for me. And this man, this monster, offered to give him a clean death if I would lie and if I would marry him." The parade ground was a scene of chaos. Soldiers loyal to Mason were facing off against Briggs's men. In the center, Jake Holloway, seeing his benefactor's world collapsing, made his move. He saw Tahan, weak and chained. He saw his $500, his land, his entire future, turning to dust. "No witnesses," Jake screamed, pulling his pistol. He did not aim at Tahan. He aimed at the easiest target. He aimed at Ayanna, who was being held nearby. "No," Tahan roared. "The chains, the wound, the weakness. It all vanished, burned away by a final, desperate surge of adrenaline." He snapped the post he was chained to, the wood rotten at its base. With a sound of inhuman rage, he launched himself, the broken post and chain still manacled to his wrist, at Jake Holloway. He hit him like a thunderbolt, sending them both crashing to the ground. Jake's pistol fired, the bullet going wild. They rolled, a tangle of limbs, rage, and pain. Jake was strong, uninjured save for his shoulder, but Tahan was fueled by a pure, righteous fury. He was no longer a man. He was an avenger. Jake pulled a long knife. Tahan, his wound tearing open, his vision graying, saw the glint. He had no weapon, only the heavy, dangling chain. They scrambled to their feet, near the railroad tracks that ran just outside the fort's main gate. A long, low whistle moaned in the distance. A train. Jake lunged, the knife flashing. Tahan wrapped the heavy chain around his forearm, blocking the blade with a spray of sparks. He used his momentum. His body was weak, but his knowledge of balance was perfect. He spun, tripping Jake, sending him sprawling. Jake rolled and came up, but Tahan was on him. He brought the heavy iron manacle down like a club, striking the knife from Jake's hand. Jake, disarmed, his eyes wide with animal terror, scrambled backward, onto the tracks. "Tahan, no, wait. We were brothers, remember?" The train whistle was deafening now, the headlight a blazing yellow eye in the dusk. Tahan stood over him, his chest heaving, blood pouring from his side. He looked at the man who had betrayed his father, the man who had murdered for a coin, the man who had just tried to kill his sister. He raised the chain for the final, killing blow, and he stopped. He looked at Jake, a creature of pure, pathetic fear, and he knew he was not him. He would not be. "Go!" Tahan rasped. He did not kill him. He did not strike. He simply turned, his body screaming in protest, and walked away from the tracks, leaving Jake to his fate. Jake stared, uncomprehending, then scrambled to his feet. He was too late. The train on the tracks, the iron horse that had cut Tahan's world in two, struck him, and his scream was lost in the shriek of steam and metal. Tahan collapsed, his strength gone. "Seize that man," Colonel Mason roared from the gate, pointing at Briggs. "Seize him for murder, for fraud, and for high crimes against the United States Army." Briggs' men, seeing their leader defeated, their second-in-command gone, threw down their weapons. Briggs stood, frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. He was arrested. In the sudden, shocked silence, Abby ran. She ran past the soldiers, past the colonel, onto the parade ground. She fell to her knees beside Tahan, who lay in the dust, his eyes closed. "Tahan," she whispered, her hand hovering over his bloody side. "Tahan, please." He opened his eyes. They were unfocused, filled with pain, but they found her. He managed a smile, a faint, agonizing quirk of his lips. He raised his hand, his fingers, stained with his own blood, touching her cheek. "Abby," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "The wind. It smells clean. It smells like you." He let his hand fall, his eyes closing as she gathered him into her arms, her sobs the only sound in the sudden twilight. The fort's doctor, a weary man named Harris, who had seen too much and said too little under Briggs' command, took charge of Tahan. He was carried, not to the stockade, but to the infirmary, a small, clean room that smelled of carbolic acid and lye. Abby refused to leave his side, her presence a silent, fierce challenge to any soldier who tried to remove her. Colonel Mason, seeing the look in her eye, simply nodded to the doctor. "See him, Dr. Harris, and to his friends. They are under my protection." Luis's shoulder was set and bandaged. Ayana, whose wounds were mostly bruises, sat on a stool, her face a mask of worry, watching the doctor work on her brother. The bullet had passed clean through the flesh of Tahan's side, a miracle of luck, but he had lost a dangerous amount of blood. He was weak, locked in the gray world between life and exhaustion. For 2 days, Abby sat by his cot. She cleaned his wound when the doctor was busy. She spooned water and thin broth between his cracked lips. She did not sleep. She just watched him breathe. Her entire world narrowed to the rise and fall of his chest. On the 3rd day, Colonel Mason came to the infirmary. He was not wearing his sword. He looked like a tired old man, not a commander. He dismissed the orderly with a wave. He looked at Luis, whose arm was in a clean sling, and at Ayana, who stood by the window, her arms crossed. Then his gaze settled on Abby, and on the sleeping man in the cot. "Miss Collins," he began, his voice low, "I have spent the last 48 hours dismantling Major Briggs's life. His official reports were fiction. His ledgers were a nest of thieves." He sighed, pulling a chair from the wall and sitting on it backward. "We found his private correspondence, letters to investors in St. Louis, promises of clear land by spring. Your testimony, and that of Mr. Luis, has been corroborated by 2 of his own men, young soldiers who finally found the courage to speak. Major Briggs will face a court-martial. He will be shipped back east in irons. He will not command so much as a mule ever again." "And the war?" Abby asked, her voice hoarse. "He started it." "He did," Mason said, his face grim. "And stopping it is like trying to put a wildfire out with a cup. The news of the massacre is everywhere. But I have sent riders. I have wired the telegraph. I have reported the truth, that the attack was a false flag operation by a rogue officer." He looked at Tahan. "I have also issued a full report on the attack on your party. Tahan, on the murder of your uncle and his peace delegation." Tahan's eyes flickered open. He was weak, but he was listening. "I will be reopening every report of unprovoked hostile action that Major Briggs has filed in the last 2 years." Mason continued, "This is a terrible injustice. Son, I cannot give you back your lands. I cannot bring back your dead. The United States government is a heavy, slow-moving beast." He looked at Tahan directly. "The bounty on your head is rescinded. You are not a criminal. You are, in the eyes of the army, a civilian who acted in defense of himself and others." He paused. "But I cannot change the treaties. Tahan, your people's assigned territory, the line is still drawn. The railroad is still the border. You are free, but you are not free. Do you understand me?" Tahan understood. The justice was imperfect. He was no longer a hunted man. But his people were still prisoners in their own land. The conflict was not over. It had just changed shape. He slowly, painfully, nodded his head. "Good," Mason said. He stood, his knees cracking. He looked old. "Dr. Harris tells me you will be fit to ride in a few days. You and your people, you are free to go." He put his hat on his head. "Miss Collins, a word." Abby followed him outside into the bright, harsh sunlight of the parade ground. "A supply wagon arrived this morning," Mason said, not looking at her. "It carried mail. There was a letter for you. It was addressed in care of Major Briggs." He handed her a clean, white envelope. The handwriting was her father's. She took it, her hand steady. "Abigail," Mason said, his voice gentle, "I can arrange for passage back east, a military escort to Santa Fe, and then the train. You will be safe. You can go home." Abby looked at the letter, then at the vast, open sky above the fort. "Thank you, Colonel," she said. "May I have some paper and a pen?" She sat in the infirmary, Tahan sleeping soundly, and read her father's words. It was a long letter. It spoke of the difficulties of the parish. It spoke of his duty to God, of the sacrifices one must make for the good of the congregation. It spoke of her disobedience as a child. It justified his arrangement with Major Briggs as a providential opportunity to secure her a stable future and to save his church. It was a letter of profound, unblinking self-deception. It did not ask if she was safe. It did not ask if she was happy. It assumed her obedience. It ended with a Bible verse about a daughter's duty. Abby felt nothing. No anger, no sorrow, just a deep, cold stillness. The girl who had received that letter was gone. She had been burned away in the wagon fire, frozen in the canyon storm, and reforged by the blast of a pistol. She took the fresh sheet of paper Mason had given her. She dipped the pen in the ink. "Father," she wrote, "I am alive. No thanks to your arrangement. The man you sold me to, Major Harlan Briggs, is a murderer and a thief. He is in irons, awaiting trial for killing the very people I traveled with. He tried to have me killed. The savage you taught me to fear, a Comanche warrior named Tahan, is the man who saved my life. He took a bullet that was meant for me. He is a better man, a more honorable man, than any I have ever known in your church. I have lived. I am not coming home. I do not know where my home is, but it is not with you. The duty you speak of is a chain. I will not wear it. The daughter you sent west is gone. I am not yours. I belong to myself now. I will make my own way. I will choose my own life. Do not look for me. Abigail." She folded the letter, her hand not trembling. A week later, Tahan was on his feet. He was weak, his side still bound, but the warrior's strength was flowing back into his veins. Ayana and Luis, his shoulder healing well, had decided to ride back to the Comanche village. They had to tell the people what had happened. "What will happen to Red Elk?" Tahan asked, his face hard. "He will face the council," Ayana said. "He betrayed us. He betrayed you. He signaled Jake Holloway." She looked at Luis, and a small, rare smile touched her lips. "But the people also know that his heart was in the right place, even if his head was not. He thought he was saving us." "And you?" Tahan asked, looking at them both. Luis, who rarely spoke more than a few words, put his good arm around Ayana's shoulders. She did not pull away. "I am tired of hauling freight for men like Briggs," Luis said. "Ayana and I are talking maybe a trading post, near the border. A fair one, a place where the Comanche can trade hides for flour and not be cheated. A place between..." "A place between," Tahan repeated, liking the sound of it. He embraced his sister. "Go. Tell them I will come when I can." Ayana and Luis rode out. not as a warrior and a freighter, but as two people with a shared future. Back in the village, the council was held. The news of Tahan's victory, of Abby's testimony, and of Briggs's arrest had stunned the people. Red Elk stood before the elders, his head held high, but his eyes empty. He did not deny what he had done. "I did it for the people," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "I did not trust the white world. I did not trust the girl. I was wrong." He was not exiled. He was not harmed. He was simply finished. The council stripped him of his titles, of his seat by the fire, of his voice in the people's affairs. He was allowed to keep his teepee, to live out his days as an old man. No longer an elder. It was a gray, living death, a loss of honor that was, to a man like him, worse than any execution. The day came for Tahan and Abby to leave the fort. Colonel Mason had given them 2 fine horses from the army stables, and a pack mule with supplies. They stood at the great wooden gates, the prairie stretching out before them, vast and empty and full of promise. Abby was dressed in a simple, sturdy riding skirt and a blue cotton shirt, clothes she had bought with a few dollars Mason had given her. She looked like she belonged here. Tahan was healed, his strength almost fully returned. He, too, had a new horse. He looked at the railroad tracks, gleaming in the sun. Then he looked north, to the high blue mountains, the old hunting grounds, the place of true freedom. He was caught between. "I can take you to Santa Fe," he said, his voice quiet, not looking at her. "You can catch the train, go back east, go home." Abby mounted her horse, a strong bay mare. She looked at the east, the direction of her old life. It felt like a story she had read in a book, about someone else. "I am not going back east," she said. Tahan turned to her, his face unreadable. "My home is not there," she said, her voice dropping, her hands tightening on the reins. "I do not think I have one, but the air here, it smells clean, like you said." She looked at him, her gaze direct, her heart hammering. "I do not want to go to a city. I want to stay. I want to stay here, where the wind smells like grass. Where are you?" Tahan was still there for a long time. He looked at her, at this impossible woman who had saved his life, who had given up her world, who had stood before his people and spoken a truth so raw it had changed them. He, who had lost his own freedom, was being offered a new one. He looked at her horse. He looked at her, sitting straight and strong in the saddle. A slow smile touched his lips, the first real smile she had ever seen. It lit his eyes, chasing the shadows away. "It is a good horse," he said, his voice soft. "We will have to see. We will have to see if your horse likes this land. We will have to see if she finds a place to run." A year passed. The land changed, and it did not. The iron rails were no longer a fresh wound. They were a fact, a scar that the prairie grass had begun to grow around. The towns, like Dust Creek, had swelled, smelling of new pine lumber, cheap whiskey, and the anxious sweat of men seeking fortunes. But beyond the last fence, beyond the smoke of the train, the land remained. The wind did not obey the treaties, and the high mesas still held the silence of centuries. On a stretch of bottom land where the Sweetwater Creek cut a green line through the red earth, a new home stood. It was set on the very edge of the Comanche territory, a place that belonged to neither world, yet touched them both. It was not a fort, and it was not a teepee. It was something new. A low, strong house made of adobe bricks that stayed cool in the relentless summer and held the fire's warmth in winter. A solid corral built of cottonwood poles held a small, fine herd of horses. A barn, sturdy and neat, held hay and grain. By the white man's law, the deed to this land, 160 acres of it, was filed at the courthouse in Santa Fe in the name of Abigail Collins. But the heart of the ranch, its muscle and its spirit, belonged to Tahan. They raised horses. Tahan's knowledge of the Comanche ponies, their endurance, Their intelligence was blended with the size and power of the bay mare Colonel Mason had given to Abby. Their stock became known, sought after by army men and ranchers alike. In the fertile land by the creek, Abby planted corn, beans, and squash. Using the seeds Ayanna had given her, the harvest was rich. The ranch became the place between, the one Luis and Ayanna had spoken of. Their own trading post was a day's ride to the north, near the reservation line, and it thrived. Luis, with his easy smile, and Ayanna, with her sharp, fair mind, had become a bridge. But Tahan and Abby's ranch became a haven. Comanche families, traveling on the old paths, would stop, making their camp by the creek. They traded tanned hides and beadwork for Abby's flour and coffee, or for a piece of iron Tahan had mended at his forge. Poor white settlers, their wagons broken, their hopes worn thin, would often find their way there. They found a full pot of stew, medical help from Abby, and work from Tahan. They found a place without judgment. In the center of the hard-packed yard, Tahan had set a tall, smooth pole. From the top, two things hung, twisting together in the high desert wind. One was his father's heavy, honored buffalo robe, the one that had sheltered him and Abby in the canyon storm. The other was a long, white linen scarf, the one that had belonged to Abby's mother, the only fine thing she had brought from the east. Hide and cloth, Comanche and white, they danced together. 2 children lived in that house, a Comanche boy of 8, whose family had been taken by the white man's fever, a white girl of 6, found wandering near the railroad tracks, her own family lost to a raid, or perhaps just to the wilderness. They bickered in a mix of English and Comanche, and they ran screaming with laughter, chasing the chickens. Tahan taught the girl to ride. Abby taught the boy his letters. They were a family, forged not by blood or law, but by a stubborn, shared choice. One afternoon, the sky turned a deep, bruised purple. A cold front was moving down from the mountains, a wind that smelled of pine and the first threat of snow. Abby came out onto the long porch, her arms full of dried laundry. She stopped, setting the basket down, and pulled her thin wool shawl tight. She shivered, an involuntary tremor as the wind cut through her cotton dress. She did not hear him. He moved with the silence of the land he came from. He stepped onto the porch behind her, and she only knew he was there when his shadow fell over her. He was no longer the wounded, hunted warrior. His face, though still marked by his past, was calmer now. The lines of anger around his mouth softened into a quiet strength. He was holding the heavy buffalo robe. This time he did not wait. He did not offer. He did not sit apart. He simply unfolded the massive hide, the fur soft and deep, and wrapped it around her from behind. His arms came with it, circling her, pulling her back against the solid warmth of his chest. His chin came to rest on the top of her head. The embrace was total. It was not the desperate, clinging warmth of 2 strangers in a storm. It was the deep, steady, confident heat of a man holding his wife. Abby let out a long, soft breath and leaned her entire weight back against him. Her hands came up and covered his, holding the edges of the robe closed, her small, pale fingers lacing with his strong, dark ones. She was home. She tilted her head, looking up, her cheek brushing the soft buckskin of his shirt. A small, teasing smile played on her lips. "Sir," she whispered, the old, formal word, now a private, intimate joke. "May I slip under your coat again?" A low laugh rumbled in his chest, a sound that vibrated through her entire body. He tightened his grip, pulling her even closer, nuzzling his face into her hair, which smelled of sunlight and soap. "You do not need to ask," he murmured. "You belong here. You have always belonged here." They stood in the shelter of the robe, watching the wind whip the dust across the corral. "The children," Abby said quietly, her voice muffled against his chest. "The boy. He read a whole page of the Premier today, by himself." "And the girl," Tahan countered, a deep pride in his voice. I saw her. She raced Luis to the creek. She almost won. She rides like one of the people. We will need a bigger room, Abby said, before the real snow comes. The one we have is too small for a school. It was their shared dream, a new room, built onto the side of the house, with a long table and a proper stove. Abby would teach any child who came. She would teach them to read, to write, to count. Tahan would teach them to ride, to track, to know the land, to understand the weather by the taste of the wind, and in the evenings, by the fire. He would tell them the old stories, the stories of his grandfather, of the coyote and the eagle, of the great herds, of the spirit horse. He would tell them of the world before the iron rails had come to cut it in two. They must not forget, he had told her, his voice fierce, one night by their own fire. Your people must not forget the wild, and my people must not forget our strength. They must know what freedom costs, and what it looks like. The gunfire was gone from their lives. The sounds of the ranch were the wind moving through the cottonwood leaves, the soft nickering of the horses in the corral, the sharp, clear laughter of the children, and the low, comfortable silence between a man and a woman who had seen the worst of the world and had chosen to build something better. That evening, the storm passed, leaving the air clear and cold. The sunset was a fire in the sky, a spectacular blaze of orange, purple, and blood red that painted the undersides of the high, thin clouds. Wildflowers, small, tough blooms of yellow and purple, pushed up through the hard-packed earth, the same earth that had, only a year before, soaked up so much blood. The land was healing. Freedom, they had learned, was not just about riding wild on an open plain. That was a freedom of youth, a freedom of escape. True freedom, the freedom of a grown heart, was about choosing. It was the brave, hard freedom to choose your own path, to build your own family, to choose the person you would love, even when the laws of men and the hatred of the world told you it was wrong. The West was still a hard, unforgiving place, but even in its deepest scars, a small patch of ground could be found where people did not belong to a border, or a color, or a past. They simply, finally, belonged to each other. As the last light faded, Tahan and Abby walked, hand in hand, up the small hill behind their house. In the vast valley below, illuminated by the last red glow of the sun, a dark line moved against the earth, a herd of wild horses running south, running for no reason but the joy of it, their manes flying, their hooves silent thunder. They stood together, watching them until they were just specks in the distance. Tahan took her hand. His was rough, calloused from the forge and the reins, but his grip was gentle. He looked at the running horses, then he looked down at her. That night, he said, his voice so low it was almost lost in the wind. In the canyon, when you slipped under my coat, I thought I had lost my freedom forever. I thought I was chained to you, a white man's burden, another trap. He turned to her, his dark eyes clear and deep in the twilight, holding an emotion he no longer fought, an emotion he treasured. I was wrong, Abby. That night, I found a new freedom, the freedom to choose my own heart, and it chose you. Abby's eyes filled with tears, but they did not fall. She smiled, a smile of such complete peace, and squeezed his hand. He said nothing more, and she said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Together, they turned from the empty, wild horizon and walked down the hill, side by side, toward the warm, yellow light of their home. Thank you for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, like this video, and give that hype button a press. It truly helps get these stories out to more folks.